welcome back. Today we're going to be reading Chapter 19 from The Golden Key and 22 Additional Essays by Emmet Fox. Today's chapter, Chapter 19, is entitled Forgiveness. Forgive us our trespasses as we forgive them that trespass against us. This clause is the turning point of the prayer. It is the strategic key to the whole treatment. Let us notice here that Jesus has so arranged this marvelous prayer that it covers the entire ground of the unfoldment of our souls completely, and in the most concise and telling way. It omits nothing that is essential for our salvation, and yet so compact is it that there is not a thought or word too much. Every idea fits into its place with perfect harmony and in perfect sequence. Anything more would be redundance, anything less would be incompleteness. And at this point it takes up the critical factor of forgiveness. Having told us what God is, what man is, how the universe works, how we are to do our own work, the salvation of humanity and of our own souls, he then explains what our true nourishment or supply is, and the way in which we can obtain it. And now he comes to the forgiveness of sins. The forgiveness of sins is the central problem of life. Sin is a sense of separation from God and is the major tragedy of human experience. It is, of course, rooted in selfishness. It is essentially an attempt to gain some supposed good to which we are not entitled in justice. It is a sense of isolated, self-regarding personal existence, whereas the truth of being is that all is one. Our true selves are at one with God, undivided from Him, expressing His ideas, witnessing to His nature the dynamic thinking of that mind. Because we are all one with the great whole, of which we are spiritually a part, it follows that we are one with all men. Just because in Him we live and move and have our being, we are in the absolute sense all essentially one. Evil, sin, the fall of man, in fact, is essentially the attempt to negative this truth in our thoughts. We try to live apart from God. We try to do without Him. We act as though we had life of our own, as separate minds, as though we could have plans and purposes and interests separate from His. All this, if it were true, would mean that existence is not one and harmonious, but a chaos of competition and strife. It would mean that we are quite separate from our fellow man and could injure him, rob him, or hurt him, or even destroy him, without any damage to ourselves. And in fact, that the more we took from other people, the more we should have for ourselves. It would mean that the more we considered our own interest and the more indifferent we were to the welfare of others, the better off we should be. Of course, it would then follow naturally that it would pay others to treat us in the same way, and that accordingly we might expect many of them to do so. Now, if this were true, it would mean that the whole universe is only a jungle, and that sooner or later it must destroy itself by its own inherent weakness and anarchy. But of course, it is not true, and therein lies the joy of life. Undoubtedly, many people do act as though they believed it to be true, and a great many more who would be dreadfully shocked if brought face to face with that proposition in cold blood have nevertheless a vague feeling that such must be much the way things are, even though they themselves are personally above consciously acting in accordance with such a notion. Now this is the real basis of sin, of resentment, of condemnation, of jealousy, of remorse, and all the evil brood that walk that path. This belief in independent and separate existence is the arch sin, and now, before we can progress any further, we have to take the knife to this evil thing and cut it out once and for all. Jesus knew this, and with his definite end in view, he inserted at this critical point a carefully prepared statement that would compass our end and his, without the shadow of a possibility of miscarrying. He inserted what is nothing less than a trip clause. He drafted a declaration which would force us, without any conceivable possibility of escape, evasion, mental reservation, or subterfuge of any kind, to execute the great sacrament of forgiveness in all its fullness and far-reaching power. As we repeat the great prayer intelligently, considering and meaning what we say, we are suddenly, so to speak, caught up off our feet, and grasped as though in a vice. So we must face this problem, and there is no escape. We must positively and definitively extend forgiveness to everyone to whom it is possible that we can owe forgiveness, namely to anyone who we think can have injured us in any way. Jesus leaves no room for any possible glossing of this fundamental thing. He has constructed his prayer with more skill than ever, yet lawyer display it in the casting of a deed. He has so contrived it that once our attention has been drawn to this matter, we are inevitably obliged either to forgive our enemies in sincerity and truth, or never again to repeat that prayer. It is safe to say that no one who reads this booklet with understanding will ever again be able to use the Lord's Prayer unless and until he is forgiven. Should you now attempt to repeat it without forgiving, it can safely be predicted that you will not be able to finish it. This great central clause will stick in your throat. Notice that Jesus does not say, quote, "Forgive me my trespasses, and I will try to forgive others," end quote. Or, quote, "I will see if it can be done," end quote. Or, "I will forgive generally, with certain exceptions." He obliges us to declare that we have actually forgiven and forgiven all. And he makes our claim to be our own forgiveness to depend upon that. Who is there who has grace enough to say his prayers at all, who does not long for the forgiveness or cancellation of his own mistakes and faults, who would be so insane as to endeavor to seek the kingdom of God without desiring to be relieved of his own sense of guilt? No one, we may believe. And so we see that we are trapped in the inescapable position that we cannot demand our own release before we have released our brother. The forgiveness of others is the vestibule of heaven, and Jesus knew it, and has led us to the door. You must forgive everyone who has ever hurt you if you want to be forgiven yourself. That is the long and short of it. You have to get rid of all resentment and condemnation of others, and not least of self-condemnation and remorse. You have to forgive others, and having discontinued your own mistakes, you have to accept the forgiveness of God for them too, and you cannot make any progress. You have to forgive yourself, but you cannot forgive yourself sincerely until you have forgiven others first. Having forgiven others, you must be prepared to forgive yourself too, for to refuse to forgive oneself is the only spiritual pride. Quote, "And by that sin fell the angels," end quote. We cannot make this point too clear to ourselves. We have got to forgive. There are few people in the world who have not at some time or other been hurt, really hurt, by someone else, or been disappointed or injured or deceived or misled. Such things sink into the memory, where they usually cause inflamed and festering wounds, and there is only one remedy. They have to be plucked out and thrown away. And the one and only way to do that is by forgiveness. Of course, nothing in all the world is easier than to forgive people who have hurt us very much. Nothing is easier than to rise above the thought of a trifling loss. Anybody will be willing to do this, but what the law of being requires of us is that we forgive not only these trifles, but the very things that are so hard to forgive that at first it seems impossible to do it at all. The despairing heart cries, "It is too much to ask that the things meant too much to me. It is impossible, and I cannot forgive it." But the Lord's Prayer makes our own forgiveness from God, which means our escape from guilt and limitation, dependent upon just this very thing. There is no escape from this. And so forgiveness there must be, no matter how deeply we may have been injured or how terribly we have suffered, it must be done. If your prayers are not being answered, search your consciousness and see if there is not someone whom you have yet to forgive. Find out if there is not some old thing about which you are very resentful. Search and see if you are not really holding a grudge. It may be camouflaged in some self-righteous way against some individual or somebody of people of a nation or race, a social class, some religious movement of which you disapprove perhaps, a political party or whatnot. If you are doing so, then you have an act of forgiveness to perform, and when this is done, you will probably make your demonstration. If you cannot forgive at present, you will have to wait for your demonstration until you can, and you will have to postpone finishing your recital of the Lord's Prayer too, or involve yourself in the position that you do not desire the forgiveness of God. Setting others free means setting yourself free, because resentment is really a form of attachment. It is a cosmic truth that it takes two to make a prisoner, the prisoner and a jailer. There is no such thing as being a prisoner on one's own account. Every prisoner must have a jailer, and the jailer is as much a prisoner as his charge. When you hold resentment against anyone, you are bound to that person by a cosmic link, a real, though mental chain. You are tied by a cosmic tie to the thing that you hate. The one person, perhaps, in the whole world whom you most dislike is the very one to whom you are attaching yourself by a hook that is stronger than steel. Is this what you wish? Is this the condition in which you desire to go on living? Remember, you belong to the thing with which you are linked in thought, and at some time or other, if that tie endures, the object of your resentment will be drawn again into your life, perhaps to work further havoc. Do you think you can afford this? Of course, no one can afford such a thing, and so the way is clear. You must cut all such ties by a clear and spiritual act of forgiveness. You must loose him and let him go. By forgiveness, you set yourself free. You save your soul. And because the law of love works alike for one and all, you help to save his soul too, making it just so much easier for him to become what he ought to be. But how in the name of all that is wise and good is the magic act of forgiveness to be accomplished when we have been so deeply injured that though we have long wished with all our hearts that we could forgive, we have nevertheless found it impossible, when we have tried and tried to forgive, but have found the task beyond us? The technique of forgiveness is simple enough and not very difficult to manage when you understand how. The only thing that is essential is willingness to forgive. Provided you desire to forgive the offender, the greater part of the work is already done. People have always made such a bogey of forgiveness because they have been under the erroneous impression that to forgive a person means that you have to compel yourself to like him. Happily, this is by no means the case. We are not called upon to like anyone whom we do not find ourselves liking spontaneously. And indeed, it is quite impossible to like other people to order. You can no more like to order than you can hold the winds in your fists. And if you endeavor to coerce yourself into doing so, you will finish by disliking or hating the offender more than ever. People used to think that when someone had hurt them very much, it was their duty as good Christians to pump up, as it were, a feeling of liking for him. And since such a thing is utterly impossible, they suffered a great deal of distress and ended necessarily with failure, and a resulting sense of sinfulness. We are not obliged to like anyone, but we are under a binding obligation to love everyone. Love or charity, as the Bible calls it, meaning a vivid sense of impersonal goodwill. This has nothing directly to do with the feelings, though it is always followed sooner or later by a wonderful feeling of peace and happiness. The method of forgiving is this. Get by yourself and become quiet. Repeat any prayer or treatment that appeals to you, or read a chapter of the Bible. And then quietly say, quote, I fully and freely forgive X. Mention the name of the offender. I loose him and let him go. I completely forgive the whole business in question. As far as I am concerned, it is finished forever. I cast the burden of resentment upon the Christ within me. He is now free and I am free too. I wish him well in every phase of his life. That incident is finished. The Christ truth has set us both free. I thank God. End quote. Then get up and go about your business. On no account repeat this act of forgiveness because you have done it once and for all, and to do it a second time would be tacitly to repudiate your own work. Afterward, whenever the memory of the offender or the offense happens to come in your mind, bless the delinquent briefly and dismiss the thought. Do this however many times the thought may come back. After a few days it will return less and less often, until you forget it altogether. Then perhaps after an interval, shorter or longer, the old trouble may come back to memory once more. But you find now that all bitterness and resentment have disappeared, and you are both free with the perfect freedom of the children of God. Your forgiveness is complete. You will experience a wonderful joy in the realization of this demonstration. Everybody should practice general forgiveness every day as a matter of course. When you say your daily prayers, issue a general amnesty, forgiving everyone who may have injured you in any way, and on no account particularize. Simply say, I freely forgive everyone. Then in the course of the day, should the thought of grievance or resentment come up, bless the offender briefly and dismiss the thought. The result of this policy be that very soon you will find yourself cleared of all resentment and condemnation, and the effect upon your happiness, your bodily health, your general life will be nothing less than revolutionary. Thank you for listening today. Hopefully you're able to forgive yourself and someone else. I hope that you have a wonderful and beautiful day, and look forward to having you back soon. Thank you and take care.